Elder Paisios of Mount Athos, Spiritual Counsels, Volume 4, Family Life, Part 4, Spiritual Life, Chapter 1, Spiritual Life in the Family. The more one grumbles, the more one falls into ruin. Yeronda, why do people grumble, and how can it be avoided? Grumbling is caused by misery, and it can be put aside by doxology, giving praise. Grumbling begets grumbling, and doxology begets doxology. When someone doesn't grumble over a problem troubling him, but rather praises God, then the devil gets frustrated and goes off to someone else who grumbles in order to cause everything to go even worse for him. You see, the more one grumbles, the more one falls into ruin. Sometimes the devil deceives us and can make us unable to be pleased with anything. However, one can celebrate all things in a spiritual manner with doxology and secure God's constant blessing. Look here, I know someone on Mount Athos who, if it's raining and you tell him it's raining again, he will start saying, yes, it's always raining and we are going to rot from all the humidity. And if after only a little while the rain stops and you tell him, well, it didn't rain too much after all, he'll say, yes, but what kind of rain was that? Everything will dry up. You can't say that he's crazy, it's just that he's grown accustomed to grumbling. It's strange to see a rational man thinking irrationally. Grumbling carries a curse. It's as if someone is cursing himself, and then the wrath of God comes upon him. People today have made their lives difficult because they're not satisfied with a few things, but are constantly chasing after more and more material goods. But those who would like to live a genuine spiritual life must first of all be satisfied with a few things. When their life is simplified, without too many concerns and nuisances, not only will they be liberated from the worldly spirit, they will also have plenty of time available for spiritual things. Otherwise, they will tire themselves out by trying to follow the fashion of the times. They will lose their serenity and will gain only great anxiety. And I see that people sometimes make a martyrdom out of their lives. Just today, as I was coming with someone from Uranopolis, he invited me to go by his home for a little visit. He insisted, so I didn't want to disappoint him. As we reached the front door, I saw him take off his shoes and walk carefully on his toes. Why are you walking like that? I asked him. There's nothing yet on the... I am walking carefully so that I don't ruin the parkway, he said. What can you say? People are tormented for no reason. The poor, faithful people in Russia are so deprived. I once offered a little box of incense to a Russian priest and said to him, it's a poor gift. You call this poor. Our incense is of such bad quality, all it does is make us cough, he said. Even here in Greece, the refugees endure so much. In Halkidiki, I met a refugee, a tile setter, who only made 300 drachmas per square metre. This was said in 1992, before the euro. 300 drachmas is now equivalent to less than €1. And he kept saying, glory to you, O God, for we have bread to eat. So when some contractor told me that he himself is burdened by a lot of sins in his line of work, I just told him, if you would support these refugees and help them out, you would be relieved of your sins. They have no place to stay. Compared to them, your Onassis, the elder here refers to Aristotle Onassis, 1906 to 1975, a prominent Greek shipping magnate. In order for us to practice the virtues, God has allowed for some people to be sick, poor, disadvantaged, and so forth. Of course, God could take care of the sick and the poor, but then we would be under the illusion that we are virtuous. For instance, we would say that we are merciful when we are not, whereas now our actions reveal our virtues. Glory be to God that there are people who sacrifice themselves to help their fellow human beings. I once met someone who, as soon as he was released from the military, willingly accepted an unjust conviction for a serious crime in order to save a family. He wasn't daunted by the ridicule, nor did he consider his future. In any case, I notice how God so provides that at least one member of every family has faith and devotion, so the other members are helped as well. I knew a family in Konitsa wherein everyone was just completely indifferent to the church. Only one daughter stood apart. As soon as she heard the church bell, she would put away her apron, stop whatever she was doing, and go to church. Even when the Germans came and the sexton rang the bell for people to evacuate their homes, she would go to church for Vespers. And even though her parents were quite stingy, she was very charitable. Her father, instead of eating a regular meal, would take a dry rusk, dip it in water, and eat it. Her mother too, was very tight-fisted. Even though her children had good jobs and owned property, she would snatch a burning ember from the fireplace instead of using up a match. She used a tin can as a coffee pot. When the daughter wanted to take something from the house and give it to some poor person, when she could not do it secretly, she would just say to her mother, "Mother, the monk needs this," knowing that her mother had cared about me when I was at the Stomian monastery. So the mother would say, "Sure, go ahead, give it." Only if it was for the monk did she raise no objection. Even during the German occupation, the daughter secretly helped a lot of poor people. She would take wheat out of the family's storage bin, carry it to the mill, grind it into flour, and then distribute it to the poor families. One day her mother caught her doing this, and she got into a lot of trouble. That's when she prayed, "God, help me find a job so that I can give my entire earnings to the poor." Not long afterwards, she was called to work at an institution. Oh, the joy she felt, and she did keep her vow. She didn't even buy a pair of socks for herself. She gave all her money to charity. Now so many people remember her and say, "May God save you and bless the bones of your parents." You see, God provided for her mother as well. Generally speaking, the difficulties faced by people nowadays compel those who wish to live spiritually to be vigilant. It's just as when, God forbid, war breaks out and people have to be in a state of alert. Those who are attempting to live spiritually have to do the same thing, be on alert. Just look at how difficult it is for the young children who wish to be close to the church today. In a way, the war waged against them by the horrible environment in which they live helps them to be alert. You see, in times of peace, where there are no difficulties, most people slack off. But that's when they should take advantage of the peace and use it for their spiritual progress. That's when they should try to prune away their shortcomings and cultivate virtues. Hezekiah is very helpful in spiritual life. It's good for one to set aside some part of the day in which to maintain quiet. He should examine himself in order to recognize his passions and struggle to overcome, uproot them, and thus purify his heart. If in fact there is a quiet and isolated room in the house, one reminiscent of a monastic cell, it would be very helpful. There, in secret, Matthew 6:4, one can carry out his spiritual duties of prayer and study. A little spiritual reading or study when carried out prior to prayer is very helpful because the soul is warmed and the mind is transformed to the spiritual realm. This is why, when one has many distractions and cares during the day, he should, if he has 10 minutes for prayer, give preference to first studying something particularly strong for 2 minutes in order to dispel the distractions. Yeronda, isn't it perhaps too difficult for someone living in the world to do these things? No, there are lay people who live very spiritually. Some even live like ascetics with their fasting, their attendance at prayer services, their reciting of the Jesus Prayer, their prostrations, even though they may have children and grandchildren. They go to church on Sunday, receive Holy Communion, and then they retreat to their cell, just like the hermits who gather on Sunday at the Kyriakon, footnote, the main church of Ascete, in which the ascetics and hermits from the nearby cells gather for common worship on Sundays and other holy days, end footnote, for public worship, and then return to the peace of their monastic souls. Glory be to God, for there are many such souls in the world. As a matter of fact, I know a family man who continually recites the Jesus Prayer no matter where he is. He has constant tears in his prayer. In prayer, his prayer became auto-activated, and his tears are sweet. They are tears of divine exaltation. I also remember a certain worker, John was his name, there on Mount Athos, who worked very hard. He did the work of 2 men. I had advised him to say the Jesus Prayer while he worked. Gradually, he became accustomed to it. He came to me once and told me that he felt great joy when he said the prayer. A serene dawn is breaking, I told him. After some time, I learnt that he had been killed by 2 drunks. Oh, I was so saddened. Some days later, a monk was looking for a tool, but couldn't find it because John had put it away somewhere. That night, John appeared in the monk's dream and told him where he had put the tool. You see, John had attained such a spiritual state that he was able to help others from the life hereafter. I remember once when my younger brother got sick, my father said, "Come, let us pray and beseech God to either heal him or take him so he will not suffer." We all prayed and he became well again. Even at meal time, we all gathered around the table to pray before we began to eat. If anyone started eating before the meal was blessed, we would say he committed fornication. You see, we viewed the lack of restraint to be a form of prostitution. It destroys a family to have each member come home any time they like and eat alone without good reason. Yeronda, if a husband doesn't live spiritually, what should his wife do? She should entrust him to Christ and pray that his heart be softened. Eventually, little by little, Christ will descend in his heart and he will start speculating. As soon as his heart is somewhat softened, then she can ask him, for example, to drive her to church. She shouldn't say to him, "Come to church with me," but "Can you please take me as far as the church?" If he takes her all the way to the church, then he might say to himself, "I've come this far, why don't I go inside and light a candle?" In this way, little by little, he may make progress. Yeronda, can the wife's spiritual father also help the husband in some way? Sometimes, in order to help the husband, the spiritual father needs to help the wife develop her spiritual life. The good will then be transmitted from the wife to the husband, and if he has a good heart, God will help him to change. Women are pious by nature, but once a man, after being somewhat indifferent towards the church, takes a spiritual turn, not even his wife can keep up with him. She may even begin to feel a little envy for not making as much progress as he does. This is why I advise the husbands to be careful in such cases, because what happens? As the husband makes spiritual progress, the wife, if she is not also living a spiritual life, may become contrary. If the husband says it's getting late, get up, let's go to church, she will tell him, go by yourself. Don't you see how much housework I have to do? Or if the husband says, great, you've kept the oil lamp, vigil lamp, unlit. Or if he goes to light it himself, she may be offended and start yelling, what are you, a priest now? Are you a monk? She may even say, why do we bother to light the oil vigil lamp? It would be better if we gave the oil to some poor person. The situation can get to the point of such Protestant notions. Naturally, she may regret the excuse she made, but she is also envious of her husband's progress. In these cases, it's 1,000 times better to leave the oil vigil lamp unlit than for the husband to light it. So, to keep a family from falling apart, I advise the husbands, when the right moment comes, tell your wife, if I go to church and pray a little and do some prostrations, or if I read some spiritual book, I'm not doing this out of abundance of devotion, but only as a means of self-restraint to keep me from being led astray by our wretched society and getting involved with bad company. If the husband handles this carefully, then the wife will be happy and may even go on to outdo her husband spiritually. But if he is careless and insensitive, he'll crush her. They might even end up divorcing. If the husband wants to help his wife spiritually, he should try to introduce her to some family that lives a spiritual life with a particularly devout mother and wife, one that she can imitate. Yeronda, some mothers ask us which prayers a child of 3 or 4 years old should say. Tell them, you are the mother. Try to find out how much your child can handle. They shouldn't give them a rule. Yeronda, do you think the children who are brought here for the night vigils get too tired? They should let them rest for a little during Orthodos and then bring them inside for the Divine Liturgy. Mothers should teach their children to pray from an early age without forcing them. Villagers in Cappadocia lived the ascetic traditions to the fullest. They would go to the ascetic cells of the saints where they would do prostrations and pray with tears, and in this way taught the children to pray. When the tsetes, Turkish irregulars, would come at night to rob them, they passed by the chapels and heard them crying. They were puzzled. They would say, what's going on? These people laugh during the day and they cry at night. They couldn't understand what was going on. When they start going to school, they should teach them little by little to read spiritual books and help them to live spiritually. Then they can become angels and their prayer will have greater boldness before God. Such children are a spiritual investment for the family. Specifically, the lives of the saints greatly assist children in the spiritual life. When I was little, I would take those little books with the lives of the saints that were available in those years, and I would go into the woods to study them and to pray. I was flying with joy. From the age of 10 to 16, when the Greek-Italian War began, I lived a carefree spiritual life. Childhood joys are pure. They leave a lifelong imprint on a person who will find himself very moved by the memory of them when he is older. If children live spiritually, they will live joyfully in this life and rejoice eternally in the presence of Christ in the afterlife. Yeronda, a woman asked us what she should do about her 2 cousins who had been living off her like parasites for years. What does she want? Should we come up with a new gospel? God has asked her to help her cousins, and he will do whatever is beneficial for their souls. Yeronda, when there is a misunderstanding among relatives, should someone intervene in order to help them? Yes, someone should say something discreetly, because if he keeps silence, he may cause further harm. If by doing this he is misunderstood, he should go once again to say, please forgive me for upsetting you. Following that, he should leave them alone and pray for them. If one wishes to live peacefully, he must be especially careful in his relationships with relatives and friends. One mustn't be fooled by the politeness he may encounter. Worldly politeness can be very harmful because it contains hypocrisy. One's external behavior may simulate the perfect saint, but when his inner self is revealed, it may be the complete opposite. It is very helpful to be simple in our relations with others, to always have good thoughts about them and to not take everybody too seriously. One should avoid discussions which are presumably held for spiritual improvement but only bring headaches instead. One shouldn't expect spiritual understanding from people who don't believe in God. It's better if one simply prays for them that God will forgive them and enlighten them. One should speak the language of each person at that person's level and not reveal the great truths that he believes and experiences, because they will not understand him as he speaks on another frequency and a different wavelength. Some people say, I want others to know Christ like I know him, and so they act as teachers to others. But to do this, their life has to be in accordance with what they are teaching. When the lives they lead teach a different Christ and do not correspond with what they say, then they cannot claim to have known Christ. And if one does not have inner practical experiences, he will be outside the realm of reality, and sooner or later he will be betrayed by his own self. When we approach someone with pain and true love, then this true love of Christ transforms our neighbor. The person who has holiness, no matter where he is, somehow creates an electromagnetic spiritual field around himself and influences those who come within this field. Of course, we must be careful not to squander our love and give our heart away too easily, because many times people will exploit our heart and turn it into ground meat, or other times they aren't able to understand us and they misinterpret us.